What happens when one of music's most legendary voices sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? The answer is a conversation that spiraled so far out of control, it ended with an icon walking off set in front of millions of viewers. This is the story of how a simple interview between Gladys Knight and Joy Behar, one of the most talked about moments in television history. Before we dive into exactly what was said that made the Empress of Soul stand up and leave, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about this whole situation. Trust me, you're going to want to share your thoughts after hearing what went down. The View's studio was buzzing with the usual pre-show energy as Gladys Knight made her way to the famous table. She had been booked to discuss her new documentary about the evolution of soul music and her decades-long career that had influenced generations of artists. The producers had prepped what they thought would be a straightforward, celebratory interview. They had no idea what was about to unfold. As the camera started rolling, Joy Behar opened with what seemed like a compliment. "Gladys Knight, the Empress of Soul, everyone, we're so thrilled to have you here. You know, I was just telling the producers backstage that your voice is one of those voices that defined an entire era. But I have to ask, when you look at today's music, do you ever feel like that era is just gone?" Gladys smiled politely, the kind of smile someone gives when they're already sensing where a conversation might be headed. "Well, Joy, I think every era has its own sound, its own message. Music evolves, and that's beautiful. What we did in the 60s and 70s, that was our time. What artists are doing now, that's their time." Joy leaned forward, her expression suggesting she was about to make a point she'd been waiting to make. "But come on, you have to admit there's a difference between real musicianship and what's happening now. I mean, half these people can't even sing without auto-tune. They're not artists like you were, they're products." The other hosts shifted slightly in their seats. Sunny Hostin glanced at Sarah N. This wasn't the direction anyone had expected in the first 2 minutes. Gladys's smile remained, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. "I think that's a little dismissive, Joy. There are incredibly talented artists working today. Different doesn't mean less than." "Oh, I'm not being dismissive," Joy said, waving her hand. "I'm being honest. You stood on stage and sang. You didn't need computers or a dozen producers to make you sound good. You were the real deal. These kids today, they wouldn't last 5 minutes in your world." "These kids today are navigating a completely different industry," Gladys countered, her voice still measured, but with a firmness creeping in. "The technology is different, the business is different, the way people consume music is different. You can't compare the two as if one is legitimate and the other isn't." Joy sat back with a knowing look, the kind of expression that suggested she thought she was about to make an irrefutable point. "Okay, but let's be real. When you recorded Midnight Train to Georgia, you went into a studio with musicians, real musicians playing real instruments, and you sang. No computers fixing your pitch, no studio magic. That's artistry. What I'm hearing on the radio now, half the time, I can't tell if it's a person or a machine." Whoopi Goldberg, who had been moderately silent, decided to interject. "Joy, I think what Gladys is trying to say is that the tools don't determine the talent. There were plenty of people in the 70s who couldn't sing either. They just didn't have the technology to hide it as well." "Thank you, Whoopi," Gladys said, nodding. "Every generation has its challenges, its innovations. My generation dealt with segregation, with record labels that took advantage of artists, with radio stations that wouldn't play our music because of the color of our skin. Today's artists deal with streaming platforms that pay them pennies, with social media pressure, with having to be performers and brands and content creators all at once. It's not easier, it's just different." Joy wasn't backing down. "But do you really think someone like, I don't know, pick any of these new artists? Do you think they have the same level of skill that you had? The same dedication? I think you're asking me to diminish an entire generation of artists, and I'm not going to do that," Gladys said, her tone still professional but unmistakably firm. "I don't know what their dedication looks like behind closed doors. I don't know how many hours they spend perfecting their craft. What I do know is that it's disrespectful to dismiss them simply because they use different tools than I did." Joy laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that lands awkwardly in a tense moment. "I'm not asking you to diminish anyone. I'm just saying we can acknowledge reality. The bar has been lowered." "According to who?" Gladys asked, and for the first time, there was an edge in her voice. According to you, according to people who aren't in the industry anymore. The bar hasn't been lowered. Joy, it's moved. And if you're not willing to move with it, that's fine. But don't act like your perspective is the only valid one. The studio audience had gone noticeably quieter. This wasn't the lighthearted banter people tuned into The View, expecting to see Dot. Sonny tried to redirect. Gladys, let's talk about your documentary. You interview several contemporary artists in it, don't you? What was that experience like for you? Gladys turned to Sonny, clearly grateful for the shift. It was incredible. I sat down with some amazingly talented young singers and producers, and what struck me most was how much they knew about the history of soul music. They weren't dismissive of what came before them. They were students of it. They understood the lineage, and they were trying to honor it while also creating something new. Joy couldn't resist jumping back in. But don't you think there's something lost when everything is so produced, so polished? There was a rawness to your music, an authenticity. Now everything sounds like it was made in a lab. Gladys set her hands on the table, a gesture that seemed to ground her. Joy, I need you to understand something. When people talk about authenticity in music, what they often mean is the sound they grew up with, the sound that feels familiar to them. But authenticity isn't about recording techniques or production styles. It's about whether an artist is expressing something true to them. And I've heard plenty of contemporary music that is deeply authentic. Give me an example. Joy pressed. Name one current artist who you think has that same level of authenticity you had. I'm not going to play that game, Gladys said, because the moment I name someone, you'll find a reason to dismiss them. And that's not a conversation. That's you waiting to prove a point you've already decided is true. The tension was palpable now. Alyssa Farah Griffin looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to diffuse the situation. Joy spread her hands as if she were being completely reasonable. I'm just having a conversation, Gladys. This is what we do here. We talk. We debate. I'm not attacking you. You're not attacking me, Gladys agreed. But you are attacking an entire generation of artists who aren't here to defend themselves. And you're asking me to co-sign that attack, which I won't do. So you're saying today's music is just as good as the music from your era? Joy asked, her tone suggesting she found that notion absurd. I'm saying it's not my place or yours to make that judgment, Gladys replied. Music serves different purposes for different people at different times. The music I made meant something to the people who needed it then. The music being made now means something to the people who need it now. Who am I to say one is more valid than the other? Joy shook her head, smiling in that way people do when they think someone is being naive. I just think we can be honest about quality. We can say that some things are better than others. Better according to what standard? Gladys asked. Yours, mine. Better is subjective. Joy, what's not subjective, is respect. And what you're showing right now isn't respect, it's condescension. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's smile faded slightly. I don't think I'm being condescending. I think I'm being realistic. You're being dismissive, Gladys corrected. There's a difference. Joy shifted in her seat, clearly not expecting to be pushed back this firmly. Gladys, I've been in entertainment for decades. I've seen trends come and go. I think I have a right to my opinion about what constitutes good music. You absolutely have a right to your opinion. What you don't have a right to do is present your opinion as objective fact and then ask me to validate it. I've been in this industry longer than you've been in entertainment. Joy, I've seen more trends, worked with more artists, and earned my living from music, not from talking about it. So when you sit here and tell me that today's artists aren't real artists, you're not just sharing an opinion. You're disrespecting people's livelihoods, their passion, their craft. Whoopi tried again to moderate. I think what Joy might be trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joy, is that there's a nostalgia for a certain era of music, a feeling that something has been lost in the transition to digital production. Then say that, Gladys responded, looking at Whoopi, but clearly still addressing Joy. Say you're nostalgic. Say you prefer the sound of analog recording. Say you miss when music was consumed differently. But don't couch your nostalgia in judgments about other people's talent or authenticity. That's not fair, and it's not accurate. Joy leaned back and crossed her arms. You know what? I think you're being a little sensitive about this. We're just having a discussion. The audience let out a collective, uncomfortable murmur. Even for The View, known for its heated debates. This was veering into territory that felt personal. Gladys's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped slightly, becoming quieter and somehow more powerful. Sensitive. That's an interesting word choice. When a woman stands up for herself or for others, she's being sensitive. When she refuses to go along with a narrative she disagrees with, she's being difficult. I've heard that my entire career, Joy. From record executives who wanted me to smile and be grateful. From producers who thought they knew my voice better than I did. From journalists who wanted me to trash other artists to make better headlines. And I didn't accept it then, and I'm certainly not going to accept it now. Sarah N. jumped in, her voice bright and clearly attempting to lighten the mood. Gladys, your career has been so incredible. 7 Grammys, countless hits. What do you think is the secret to longevity in this business? Gladys turned to Sarah, and for a moment it seemed like she might let the conversation shift. But then she turned back to Joy. You know what the secret is? Respect. Respecting the people you work with. Respecting the people who came before you. Respecting the people who come after you. Understanding that just because something is different from what you did doesn't make it less valuable. Joy uncrossed her arms and leaned forward again. Okay, let me ask you this then. Do you think there's any validity to the criticism that music today lacks substance? That it's all about image and marketing instead of the actual music? Music has always been about image and marketing, Gladys said, her patience clearly wearing thin. Do you think Motown didn't carefully craft our images? Do you think Berry Gordy wasn't thinking about marketing when he put us through charm school? When he decided what we wore? How we moved on stage? The difference is, you remember it fondly because you associate it with your youth. But it was a business then, and it's a business now. But the music was better, Joy insisted. You can't tell me that what's on the radio now is comparable to what you were doing. What's on the radio now is what millions of people want to hear, Gladys countered. Just like what was on the radio then was what millions of people wanted to hear. You don't get to decide what has value for other people, Joy. You only get to decide what has value for you. Joy laughed, but there was frustration in it. So basically you're saying, we can't have standards. We can't say anything is good or bad. It's all just subjective. I'm saying standards are cultural and contextual, Gladys replied. The standards you're applying are your standards from your cultural moment, from your perspective. They're not universal truths, Sunny interjected, trying to find middle ground. But Gladys, surely you can understand where Joy is coming from. There are a lot of people who feel like something has been lost in modern music, that the artistry isn't the same. Gladys turned to Sunny with a look that was both tired and determined. Sunny, I do understand that feeling. I understand nostalgia. What I don't understand is why that nostalgia has to come at the expense of dismissing contemporary artists. You can love the music of the past without tearing down the music of the present. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Joy wasn't finished. But you're acting like I'm attacking people personally? I'm talking about the music, not the people making it. You can't separate the two, Gladys said firmly. When you say the music lacks authenticity, you're saying the artists lack authenticity. When you say it lacks artistry, you're saying the artists aren't artists. These aren't abstract concepts we're discussing, Joy. These are people's careers, their identities, their contributions to culture. Words matter. So I'm supposed to pretend that everything is great. That there are no legitimate critiques to be made. Joy's voice was rising now, matching the intensity of the moment. You're supposed to be thoughtful about how you frame your critiques, Gladys responded, her own voice remaining controlled. You're supposed to recognize that you're speaking from a position of privilege and platform. When you say these things on national television, you're not just sharing your opinion with me. You're shaping how millions of people think about contemporary artists. That's a responsibility, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Whoopi held up a hand. Okay, I think we need to take a breath here. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more from Gladys Knight. As the show cut to commercial, the cameras pulled back, but the microphones caught fragments of what happened next. Joy turned to Gladys and said something that wasn't fully audible, but Gladys's response was clear. I'm not doing this for the cameras, Joy. I'm doing this because it matters. When they came back from commercial, there was a visible attempt to reset the energy. Alyssa Farah Griffin asked about Gladys's favorite memory from her time with the Pips. Gladys answered graciously, sharing a story about a performance in Paris where the audience wouldn't stop applauding. For a few minutes, it seemed like the interview might end on a positive note. But then Joy couldn't help herself. You know, Gladys, I think part of why this conversation got so heated is because you represent something that we don't see anymore. A certain kind of excellence that feels rare now. Gladys set down the glass of water she had been drinking from and looked directly at Joy. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You think you're complimenting me, but what you're actually doing is using me as a weapon against other artists. You're trying to pit me against them, to get me to say that I'm better, that my era was better, and I won't do it. I'm not trying to pit you against anyone, Joy protested. I'm acknowledging your talent, by diminishing theirs, Gladys said. That's not acknowledgement, that's comparison, and it's unnecessary. My talent doesn't require anyone else to be less talented. My success doesn't require anyone else to fail. The fact that you can't praise me without insulting others tells me everything I need to know about the point you're actually trying to make. Joy's face flushed slightly. You know what, Gladys? I invited you here to celebrate you and your career. I thought we were going to have a fun conversation about music and your documentary. I didn't expect to be lectured about how I'm supposed to think or talk. You invited me here to agree with you, Gladys corrected. There's a difference. And when I didn't play along with your narrative about how music used to be better and artists used to be more authentic, you got defensive. You called me sensitive. You suggested I was overreacting. Those are tactics people use when they want to shut down a conversation they're not winning. The other hosts were frozen now, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Joy's voice took on a sharp edge. I'm not trying to shut down anything, but I also don't think I should have to walk on eggshells because you disagree with me. This is a talk show. We talk. We have different opinions. That's the whole point. Having different opinions is fine, Gladys said, and her voice was steady, but there was steel in it now. Using your platform to demean an entire generation of artists is not, and asking me to participate in that demeaning is disrespectful, not just to them, but to me. I have not demeaned anyone, Joy shot back. I've expressed my opinion about the state of modern music. Last time I checked, I was allowed to have opinions. Gladys nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting for exactly that response. You're absolutely allowed to have opinions, Joy, and I'm allowed to call out those opinions when they're harmful. That's how conversation works. You don't get to say whatever you want and then hide behind free speech when someone challenges you on it. Joy's jaw tightened. Harmful. You think my opinion about music is harmful? That's dramatic, don't you think? Not when you understand the impact of representation and validation, Gladys replied. When someone with your platform says that modern artists aren't real artists, that they lack authenticity, that they're just products, you're sending a message to young people trying to make it in this industry that their work doesn't matter. You're telling them that unless they do things the way you think they should be done, they're not legitimate. That's not just an opinion, Joy. That's gatekeeping. Sunny attempted to mediate again. I think maybe we're all talking past each other here. Gladys, you're passionate about defending contemporary artists. And Joy, you're passionate about what you see as a decline in musical quality. Can't both things be true? Can't we acknowledge that the industry has changed in ways that are both positive and negative? Gladys turned to Sunny with an expression that suggested appreciation for the effort, but disagreement with the premise. Sunny, the problem with that both sides approach is that one side is coming from a place of respect and the other isn't. I'm not sitting here saying that the music of the 60s and 70s was bad or that Joy's preferences are wrong. What I'm saying is that her preferences don't give her the right to delegitimize other people's work. That's not a both sides situation. That's one person tearing down and another person defending. Joy threw up her hands. Okay, you know what? Clearly we're not going to agree on this. So let's just move on. Let's talk about something else. That's convenient, Gladys said quietly, and there was something in her tone that made everyone at the table go still. When the conversation gets uncomfortable, when you're being held accountable for your words, suddenly it's time to move on. But you were perfectly happy to keep going when you thought I would just nod along and validate your perspective. I'm trying to be gracious here, Joy said, her voice tight. I'm trying to let this go so we can end on a good note. Gracious would have been not starting this in the first place, Gladys responded. Gracious would have been asking me about my documentary, about my process, about what I learned from working with contemporary artists instead of using my presence to launch into a criticism of them. You didn't bring me here to celebrate my career, Joy. You brought me here to use me as proof that things were better in the past. and I'm not interested in being used that way. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice firm, but not unkind. Gladys, I hear you. I think Joy hears you too, but we do have to keep the show moving. Can we talk about the documentary itself? About what viewers can expect to see? Gladys looked at Whoopi for a long moment, then back at Joy, then down at her hands folded on the table. When she looked up again, there was a resignation in her expression, a weariness that seemed to settle over her. Whoopi, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't think I can sit here anymore and pretend this is okay. I don't think I can spend the next 10 minutes talking about my work with people who fundamentally don't respect what that work represents. The studio went completely silent. Even the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. Joy's eyes widened. Wait, what are you saying? Gladys pushed her chair back slightly from the table. I'm saying that this interview is over. I came here in good faith to talk about something I'm proud of, something that celebrates both the past and the present of soul music. Instead, I walked into what feels like an ambush, where I'm expected to validate opinions I find disrespectful and reductive. I've spent 50 years in this industry, being diplomatic, being gracious, being the bigger person, and I'll continue to be all of those things. But what I won't do is sit here while an entire generation of artists gets dismissed and degraded. Sarah N. looked panicked. Gladys, I'm sure we can find a way to continue this conversation in a way that feels good for everyone. Sarah, you seem like a lovely person. And I appreciate the sentiment, Gladys said, her voice gentle but final. But this isn't about finding a way to make everyone comfortable. This is about standing up for something that matters. Those young artists I interviewed for my documentary, they're out there right now, working hard, fighting for recognition, dealing with an industry that's harder to navigate than ever before. The last thing they need is someone with a platform like this telling the world that their work isn't real, that their artistry doesn't count. And the last thing I'm going to do is sit here silently while that happens. Joy's face had gone from flushed to pale. Gladys, you're being ridiculous. I never said anyone's work wasn't real. You're putting words in my mouth. Gladys stood up slowly, with the kind of grace and dignity that can only come from decades of performing on the world's biggest stages. Joy, I don't need to put words in your mouth. You've said plenty. The problem is, you don't seem to understand the weight of what you've said, or the position you've put me in by saying it. So rather than continue to go in circles, rather than waste any more time trying to explain something you clearly don't want to understand, I'm going to excuse myself. Whoopi stood up too, reaching out as if to physically stop what was happening. Gladys, come on. Let's take another break. Let's reset. There's nothing to reset, Whoopi, Gladys said, and she was already removing the small microphone clipped to her outfit. I've said what I need to say, and more importantly, I've heard what I need to hear. This isn't the right environment for the conversation I thought we were going to have. And that's okay. Not every interview works out, but I'm not going to compromise my values or the respect I have for other artists just to make good television. Alyssa Farah Griffin spoke up for the first time in several minutes, her voice almost pleading. Gladys, I think you're absolutely right about everything you've said. About respect, about how we talk about contemporary artists. Please don't leave. Let's use this moment to have a real conversation about generational differences in how we view art and music. Gladys smiled at Alyssa, a genuine smile that softened her features. Alyssa, I appreciate that. I really do. But a real conversation requires all parties to be open to having their perspectives challenged and possibly changed. And I don't think everyone at this table is in that place right now. So rather than turn this into more of a spectacle than it already is, I'm going to take my leave with whatever grace I have left. Joy finally stood as well, her movements jerky and defensive. You know what, Gladys? If you want to walk out, walk out. But don't act like you're taking some moral high ground here. You're walking out of an interview because someone disagreed with you. That's not brave. That's childish. The word childish seemed to electrify the air. Gladys stopped in the process of gathering her belongings and looked at Joy with an expression that was impossible to read. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but every word landed with precision. Childish would be sitting here and engaging in a petty back and forth that accomplishes nothing. Childish would be getting defensive and making personal attacks because I don't like being challenged. Childish would be using my platform to tear down people who aren't here to defend themselves. I'm walking out because I have enough self-respect to know when a situation is not serving anyone well. That's not childish, Joy. That's called having boundaries. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Whoopi cut her off with a sharp look. Gladys, I understand your position. I don't want you to leave, but I respect your decision. Thank you for being here and for saying what you felt needed to be said. Gladys nodded at Whoopi, then at Sunny, Sarah, and Alyssa. She did not look at Joy again. As she walked off the set, the cameras followed her for a moment before cutting back to the hosts. The audience was completely silent, unsure whether to applaud or remain quiet. A few scattered claps started but died out quickly when no one else joined in. Joy sat back down heavily, her face a mixture of anger and shock. Whoopi addressed the camera with the kind of professional composure that comes from decades of live television. Well, that was certainly an unexpected turn. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. As the cameras cut away, Joy could be heard saying something under her breath. Whoopi turned to her and said something in return that the microphones didn't quite catch, but the body language was clear. This wasn't a moment that would be easily forgotten or smoothed over. What started as a simple interview about a documentary had become a defining moment about respect, generational differences, and what happens when someone refuses to play along with a narrative they find harmful. Gladys Knight, the Empress of Soul, had walked off the set of The View, not in a moment of petty anger, but in a demonstration of the kind of principle and self-respect that had defined her entire career. So what do you think about what happened here? Was Gladys Knight right to walk off, or should she have stayed and continued the conversation? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep this discussion going, because clearly, this is a conversation that's far